So I'm going to be talking about the cultural significance of Joe Rogan upon society in the West. I hope you guys are doing well this summer. I hope you're growing in virtue. It has been hot lately where I'm at. We've had El Nino this year, so it's been raining like crazy, and it just went straight to 90s, 100s lately. So also another thing of interest is the Pentagon and the government are like, oh yes, aliens exist, aliens are real, and no one cares because the average man is dealing with all this inflation, is just trying to get by, and everyone in the West is just objectively getting more poor. And so it's like, why should I care about aliens when I've got all these problems in my own life? Related to aliens is Joe Rogan. And, he's done a lot of good and a lot of bad. I've been positively impacted and negatively impacted by the guy. I don't know if I would have reverted back to the Catholic Church had I not followed the Joe Rogan podcast. Not because of him directly, but because of the people that he introduced to me and the ideas that he introduced to me on his podcast. So the podcast renaissance was because of Joe Rogan. I think before Joe Rogan, no one really thought of podcasts as something cool or something to do. He kind of revolutionized it. I mean, there was some popular podcasts before, like NPR Radio 137. We're going to be talking about road infrastructure, but it was pretty boring, pretty sterile stuff. Joe Rogan kind of he made it interesting. He was a great host. He introduced a lot of interesting people and interesting ideas onto it, and he did it kind of in a way that the common man could relate to. He popularized some good ideas, such as, the podcast renaissance was because of him. I think the podcast renaissance has been better than the mainstream kind of like watching the news type of content. Now people just get their news from the internet. So in a way, he paved the way for so many other figures who have impacted our culture. He also popularized MMA and jiu-jitsu. He had numerous MMA fighters on, and I think a lot of guys got into MMA because of Joe Rogan podcast and jiu-jitsu. I think it's a net positive upon society that people are training martial arts, given that there's a lot of virtue that can be acquired from it. So, his popularization of martial arts is a good thing. He also popularized a lot of comedians such as Theo Von, Bill Burr, Joey Diaz, and there's been some funny moments on the podcast. Definitely irreverent sometimes, but I don't know. I personally think Theo Von is pretty funny. He's also, I'd say his biggest positive is that he brought in figures who promoted positive masculinity, such as Jocko Willink and David Goggins and Jordan Peterson. I think a lot of people in the West, they don't have great father figures, unfortunately, and so a lot of us have been influenced by figures such as Jocko Willink, who tell us that discipline equals freedom, or Jordan Peterson, who tells us to clean up our rooms, and that has been net positive. I think that Jordan Peterson was a major stepping stone for me to go from kind of like an atheist. I was a cradle Catholic, but then I fell away thanks to the Novus Ordo partially, but also because a lot of my answers were not questioned. A lot of my questions were not answered. I just believed in evolution, and because of Jordan Peterson, he kind of opened the door for me to start investigating back into the Catholic faith. So his introduction of figures such as that was major. Plus, he was just kind of an actually inspiring figure. He was an older guy who was in shape. He wasn't like a baby boomer who's overweight. He was a black belt in martial arts. He was kind of an intellectual. He had a curiosity and a zeal for life. He was an inspiring masculine figure for many men. So I think that I was positively impacted by Joe Rogan. I've probably learned a lot of lessons just from listening to the JRE that I've internalized. I don't even know anymore. It's just part of me now. So I think his content really has become more stale since he sold out to Spotify back in 2020. A few negatives about Joe Rogan. It's not all sunshine and roses. He has also popularized some ideas that are detrimental to society, such as, I say the biggest one is drug use and psychedelics. Marijuana. He popularized doing psychedelics and doing marijuana, and I think those things are going to destabilize the country. I got really into that stuff for a while. I was listening to Terrence McKenna, Dennis McKenna, a lot of that new agey stuff, Paul Stamets, Russell Brand, and there is good and bad in having that kind of knowledge, but I think God did create these things, but I think if it's not like leading you towards God, it's like any kind of positive experiences you have are despite. It's not because necessarily. Documentary called DMT, the spirit molecule, but it can be a good thing in that knowing about this psychedelic stuff can break someone out of just being a materialist, like an atheist. So he also really pushes evolution, and he's kind of popularized the stoned ape theory, which is basically the belief that humans evolved from apes, and part of what makes humans is that they started doing magic mushrooms on the plains of Africa. From the cow patties of these cows, they started eating magic mushrooms, and that expanded their brain to be able to evolve to be who we are. I think that Joe Rogan is probably involved in the occult. The dude is in favor of transhumanism. If you watch the Elon Musk podcast, they talk a lot about merging AI and humans, and he talks about the DMT entities, and a lot of that stuff is just straight up demonic. It's like a trap. It's like, oh yes, it's like taking a bite from the apple, the Garden of Eden. It's like, yes, we know about these DMT entities who are basically they've evolved far past where we have. If you just extrapolate out human progress, we're just going to eventually evolve and continue to progress to the point where we are going to transcend, and we're going to become like aliens, and we're going to ascend and become like gods, essentially. And so therefore, if we kind of interface with these entities, these DMT entities and these other figures, these ancient aliens, then we can evolve and gain the technology to be able to advance and become like gods ourselves. And that's literally what these people believe, which is crazy. But at a certain point, you gotta realize what's the difference between that and just this demons? What's the difference between a DMT interdimensional entity and just a straight up demon in the spiritual world? He's popularized aliens a lot. He's always talked about aliens. Oh yeah, aliens. But I used to be an alien believer myself. I looked into it. I feel and my conclusion is that aliens are actually spirits. They are, not to say that God couldn't create aliens, but a lot of the theory of aliens is built upon the assumptions of evolution, that if life can just naturally just happen here on Earth, then that means that it could happen elsewhere where the right conditions exist. So I don't believe in the alien stuff. I don't believe in the occult stuff. I think that's all just demonic. So he's got the third eye on his logo. If you watch episode 1666, he's got all the occult robes and stuff, and he plays it off as playing dumb, but I think the guy just knows about this stuff, and he's kind of mainstreamed it to some degree. Now the Pentagon is saying, oh yes, we have alien technology. Aliens weren't really a thing until the 1800s. And if you look into UFOlogy, most of the top alien guys, they don't believe that aliens physically traveled across space, because if you're going faster than the speed of light and you hit a grain of sand in space, your ship's going to blow up. So they believe that they're using wormholes and using other dimensions. So I don't know. In the works of Josephus, the Jewish historian, during the time of Jesus, apparently they were seeing stuff coming out of the sky back then too. So these things have always been here, but my thought is that they're just not of this world. They are spiritual entities, maybe good or bad, but if they're trying to lead you towards transhumanism, then they're evil, then they're demonic. So I think that, notice how he barely has any Christians on his podcast too. One thing that was surprising recently is he had Dr. Stephen C. Meyer on. You should really check out his work. He talks about intelligent design. He talks about abiogenesis, and it was surprising that he did have basically intelligent design person on his podcast. I think there's been good and bad in that the average bro has been positively impacted and towards becoming more masculine, but the pagans were masculine too. So I think he's kind of paving the way for a neo-paganism type of thing to happen. So you can acknowledge the good and the bad in someone. I think I was positively impacted through him, but I think that Joe Rogan, if he's being intellectually honest, he needs to take a deeper look at Christianity and start questioning all this New Age evolution stuff. And he needs to start becoming Catholic. Jordan Peterson also, he's taken the slow train towards Catholicism, but I think at a certain point you just gotta take the leap. You gotta just acknowledge that Jesus Christ is king, that evolution is not real, and that's good and bad has come out of the JRE. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.